Hi everyone, I'm majicDave and this is Ambience. First up, I'm trying a different format for this video. So I'm going to be putting more effort into planning what I'm going to say. I do tend to go off topic way too often and I lose my train of thought. So I'm trying to improve that by writing a script. Hopefully it ends up an improvement. Let me know what you prefer. So, in the last video I mentioned that I wanted to sort out the Muppet problem where all the guys looked the same and kind of rubbish. So I thought about how to solve this problem and figured out that if I took the base 3D model and varied one particular feature like the nose length or like if I widened the chin and saved that model out separately, then I could take the difference between that and the base model and then I could add them all together. So I could give a random weighting to each feature. So add those all together and I get an infinite number of combinations and every face would look unique. When I posted about this idea on Twitter, a fellow Kiwi developer, Care Rice, mentioned that this was a well-known technique already and it goes by the name of morph targets or shape keys. When I looked into this further, I found out that the GLTF file format that I'm using and the Blender exporter already support morph targets, and it was trivial to export all the variations in one file and pretty easy to import them too. So now I have scriptable weights for the loading of many variations of each model. I could also use this to change facial expressions to show moods, so give them a big smile or even maybe close their eyes when they're sleeping and that sort of thing. I also spent quite a lot of time improving the face model. It went to some pretty bad places, but I learned a lot and I'm getting closer to a good result, I think. But I'm not quite there yet. I'll probably continue to tweak the look right up until release. One major thing that I found was that aligning groups of triangles so that they all face the same direction made a huge difference. As well as the look of the people, I also did quite a bit of work on how they're loaded and how they're tied to the player. Previously they were just loaded up randomly around the world in the same way that trees and rocks are. But now you get 3 of them assigned to you when you first connect to the server. They're basically like the start of your tribe, and from there more people will show up when those people have children or randomly, as long as you have the resources to support more people. I also added little markers above their heads. I wanted to test this mechanic and see whether it would work going forward, and I'm really happy with it. The markers will be visible from any distance, and so you can use them to check up on people who are far away and also to teleport between them. So this means that the people themselves are basically waypoints. You'll be able to send them off exploring and then teleport over to quickly check up on what they've found. The world does take a little while to load around you when you teleport a long distance, but I can make it load faster, and if it still ends up taking a while, then I'll make it fade out to some nice sort of teleportation graphic or something, and then it can just fade back in when it's done loading. But I think I can definitely make it fast enough to not be annoying. From there, I wanted to add the concept of hunger and the ability to eat. So first I added apple trees. So to position the apples on each tree, I used my model placeholder code, which was what I'd set up for campfires in the last video. This means that as the people pick apples, I can actually remove them, and in the future I'll make them grow back as well. So as you can see, people now pick apples, but they also now have a concept of hunger. At the moment it goes up very rapidly, just for testing, and they're usually hungry. So once I've picked some apples, they will all eagerly come over and start eating them, which sets their hunger back to 0. This thing where they automatically find and eat apples when they're hungry is actually kind of the first step towards a proper AI. And I want to have a lot more of these sorts of things where they decide to do tasks on their own as a result of their own needs and what happens around them. So they won't just be following your orders directly. So those are the major noticeable features. I've also added these pine trees, which will probably only end up in colder environments. And I've played around a little bit with the distribution of snow. I basically made it so that within a single biome you can have patches of different surface types. I also made it so that the game now saves out preferences. I've added a few more settings, and it's now super easy for me to just add settings for whatever I like and save and load those preferences between game sessions. And I spent a couple of days making it compile on Windows again. It had actually been a couple of years, believe it or not, since I'd last built it on Windows, so there were a number of silly little issues to resolve, and it was quite painful, but there was nothing too major. Behind the scenes, I also did a lot of work refactoring all of my Lua code. I use Visual Studio Code as my editor for my Lua scripts and GLSL shaders. I use an extension which is just called VS Code Lua to color the code, and it gives me some basic sort of immediate feedback when I'm making mistakes. But it turned out that I wasn't utilizing a major component of that extension. It had the option to enable Lua check, which does a better job of analyzing the entire source file every time you make a change, and can underline chunks of code to point out when you're probably doing something stupid. One stupid thing that I was constantly doing was misspelling variable names, and LuaCheck is very good at pointing that out to you. However, it didn't work very well with my code as it was because I was using a lot of global variables, and LuaCheck would just point out all these global variables, and so I wouldn't notice when I was actually doing something stupid. Using heaps of globals is a bad idea generally anyway, so it was time to start using modules to properly keep things separate, not end up with a giant mess of spaghetti code. So getting rid of all my globals took a few days, but I'm seeing a massive improvement in productivity now that my editor is pointing out all these silly mistakes as soon as I make them, rather than having to debug runtime errors. So that's all the major things I worked on. From here, there are a number of different things I could do next. Pathfinding is something I would really like to work on very soon. At the moment, they just walk in a straight line at a constant speed, no matter what, and this ends up with them, among other problems, ends up with them all standing in the same space right on top of each other, and that's starting to annoy me. But I will quite soon have houses and things for them to avoid too, and doors to go in and out of, so that will make pathfinding a lot more complex. So I'm thinking I might hold off on pathfinding until I've added a few buildings first. I'm also thinking about what the threat's going to be to these guys. So I could just go with the blockheads route and have a few animals that inflict some damage, and just have like health and drowning and sort of basic threats. But I think for Ambience that I really want to have a much more serious threat that puts real pressure on the player to advance and also defend what they've built. So if players want to turn that threat off, that's fine, whatever, but I think it will actually make, for most people anyway, a much more exciting and enjoyable game. So I'm definitely thinking about that. But before I get onto that, I think I'll continue to work on the people in the game. I want to add a few more types of state for the people, like tiredness and boredom, which I think could be quite interesting, and also add more actions that can be triggered by their own needs. I want to start on a knowledge mechanic too, so you'll be able to get the people to actually research or practice to unlock new mechanics and buildings. So that will actually be tied to each individual person. Once they've learned a skill, they'll be able to then pass that on to other people. But that's the plan. I guess we'll see how that pans out. But yeah, it's probably also time to start adding some actual buildings. So thanks for watching, and as they all say, please like and subscribe, and I'll catch you next time.